Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The explosion echoed through the shattered city, rattling what remained of the Avengers' headquarters. Smoke billowed into the sky, twisting into unnatural shapes as if the air itself had turned against them. Captain Hunter stood amidst the ruins, his face hardened by a mixture of disbelief and anger. Chronos had won. Again, everyone's accounted for. Serafina's voice crackled over his earpiece, but it lacked the usual confidence he'd come to rely on. Except a broken bar, we never stopped it. Hunter didn't need to be told. He could see it with his own eyes. The devastation Chronos had unleashed wasn't just physical, it was temporal. Events they had fought so hard to prevent were now unfolding like a bad dream. Hunter slammed his fist into a broken console, the sharp pain reminding him he was still alive, still in the fight. "We failed," he muttered under his breath, knowing full well what it meant. The world, maybe the universe, was unraveling before them, and for the first time in his life, Captain Hunter felt helpless. Serafina landed beside him, her robes swirling with the energy of the universe, but even she looked diminished. Her magical aura, usually radiant and powerful, flickered weakly. The timelines were being corrupted faster than she could perceive. "He's altered everything," she said, her voice laced with a sense of dread Hunter had never heard before. "We stopped nothing." None of it. The world had shifted. In every memory they had, every victory, every fight they had lost. It didn't make sense, but it was happening. Chronos had gone further than any villain before, wielding time like a weapon and cutting their past to pieces. Hunter breathed heavily, gripping his helmet tight before tossing it to the ground. "We have to fix this." "And how, exactly?" A voice cut in, sharp and frustrated. It was Arrow, his black suit singed from the fight. He limped forward, eyes burning with anger. "We didn't even see it coming. We were blindsided." Serafina looked between them, her eyes glowing faintly as she reached out to the thin threads of magic that connected the fabric of reality. "There's a way," she began, though her voice was cautious. "It's not going to be easy." "When is it ever easy?" Xander's voice joined them, the cybernetic soldier's mechanical arm whirring as he adjusted the damaged chronocore device strapped to his wrist. The gadget had once been their secret weapon, but now it was malfunctioning, damaged by Chronos' temporal sabotage. "This thing is busted. It's not gonna hold up for long." Hunter shook his head. "We don't have time for a long, Xander. We barely have time for right now." Serafina turned to them both, her eyes gleaming with determination. "We're going to have to go back to our key moments," said the ones Chronos altered. "We'll undo his changes and restore the timeline." Arrow scoffed, though it was more out of desperation than disbelief. "Time travel? That's your plan?" "It's the only plan," Serafina said sharply, her gaze unwavering. "He's already rewritten our past. Every victory, every success, he erased it. If we don't stop him now, everything we know will be lost." Hunter nodded, his jaw set firm. He had always known the stakes were high, but this was a level beyond anything they'd ever faced. Time itself was unraveling, and if they didn't act soon, there wouldn't be anything left to save. "I'm in," he said simply. Arrow sighed, shaking his head as if he couldn't believe what they were about to attempt. "Fine, but if we screw this up, hey." "We won't," Hunter cut in, his voice hard. "We can't." Serafina raised her hand, and the air around them shifted, filled with a strange humming energy that made the hairs on Hunter's neck stand on end. "Get ready," she said, her voice competent. "This is going to feel a broken bar strange." In an instant, the world around them twisted, reality folding in on itself as Serafina's spell enveloped them. Time warped, stretched, and then collapsed, pulling them into the flow of the past. The first thing Hunter noticed was the silence. The chaotic sounds of the battle were gone, replaced by the eerie calm of a moment long since past. He found himself standing in the middle of a city, but it wasn't the ruined wasteland he had just left. No, this was different. It was the past of his past. He glanced around, taking in the familiar sight of the city on the eve of one of their most decisive victories. Except a broken bar, something was wrong. "This is it," Serafina said, her voice echoing in his mind through the psychic link she had established. The moment where it all started to go wrong, Hunter clenched his fists. He remembered this day well. It had been one of their greatest triumphs, or at least it had been. But now, thanks to Chronos, the timeline had been altered. This battle had never been won. In this version of history, they had lost. "We need to find the point of divergence." Serafina's voice guided him. "Something Asamiania changed the course of events. We need to stop it before it's too late." Hunter's heart pounded as he made his way through the streets, searching for any sign of the enemy's interference. The city looked the same, but there was an underlying tension in the air, a sense that something was about to go terribly wrong. And then he saw it, a figure, cloaked in shadow, moving silently through the crowd. Hunter's breath caught in his throat. It was Hema, his younger self, just moments before the critical decision that would lead them to victory. But now, something was different. The shadowy figure trailing Hema, it had to be one of Chronos' agents, the shadows of time. Without hesitation, Hunter broke into a sprint, his heart racing as he closed the distance between himself and the figure. He had to stop this. He had to fix it. The figure moved quickly, darting into an alleyway just as Hunter reached the corner. He skidded to a stop, drawing his weapon as he cautiously approached. There was no time for hesitation. One wrong move, and the entire timeline would be lost. Suddenly, the figure turned, and Hunter found himself face to face with a broken bar himself. His younger self stared back at him, wide-eyed and confused, his weapon drawn but shaking slightly. "Well, what the hell is going on?" Hunter swallowed hard. This was the moment that would decide everything. "Listen," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "I don't have time to explain, but you need to trust me. I'm you, just from the future, and right now, we're both about to make a huge mistake." Meanwhile, in another time and place, Serafina hovered above a burning battlefield, her eyes glowing with the light of 1,000 stars. The celestial Staffa, her greatest regret. She could feel its dark energy pulsing through the air, corrupting everything it touched. Chronos had done this. He had changed the past, allowed the staff to fall into the wrong hands. Her heart ached as she watched her younger self struggle, torn between fear and duty. The staff was too dangerous, too powerful. She should have sealed it away. But in this timeline, she had failed, and now, the consequences were unraveling the fabric of reality. "I have to fix this," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the roar of the battle below. "I won't let him win." With a wave of her hand, she descended toward the battlefield, her presence bending the very air around her. Time slowed, the world seeming to hold its breath as she approached her younger self. The younger Serafina hesitated, her hand hovering over the staff, torn between the temptation of its power and the knowledge of the destruction it could cause. Serafina's heart pounded in her chest. She remembered this moment all too well. The doubt, the fear, it had consumed her then, and it was consuming her now. "No," she whispered, stepping forward. "Not this time." In a surge of power, Serafina reached out, her magic intertwining with her younger self's, guiding her hand away from the staff. It wasn't easy, the temptation was still there, pulling at her like a dark idea, but this time, she was stronger. With a final burst of energy, Serafina sealed the staff away, its dark power fading into nothingness. The battlefield shimmered, reality shifting back into place as the timeline corrected itself. Hunter's heart raced as his younger self stared back at him, confused and ready to attack. There was no time to explain everything, he had to act fast. His mind raced, searching for the right words to say, knowing one misstep could ruin everything. "You don't have time to figure this out," Hunter said urgently. "Trust your instincts. You're about to walk into a trap set by Chronos. We lose this battle because of a decision you make right now, but it's not your fault. He manipulated you. Don't take the left flank. Go right. Trust me." The younger Hunter's eyes narrowed, doubt flickering across his face. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" "You don't," the older hunter admitted, frustration simmering beneath his calm facade. "But you know deep down something is wrong. You've felt it all day, like the universe is off balance. This is that moment. Make the right call, and we change everything." For a tense moment, his younger self weighed the words, glancing between the path ahead and the older version standing in front of him. Then, as if something clicked, his younger self nodded sharply. He turned and took the right flank, rallying the team in that direction. Hunter exhaled, relief flooding him as the decision rippled through the timeline. He watched as the battle unfolded differently this time. The enemies that had overwhelmed them before were blindsided by the sudden shift in tactics. Their forces faltered, giving the Avengers the upper hand. The first correction had worked. But there wasn't time to celebrate. Hunter could already feel the distortion in the air again, Chronos' presence lingering. The shadows of time weren't finished, and he knew more would be coming for them. "Serafina," he spoke through their psychic link, "the first timeline is secure." "How's it going on your end?" Serafina's voice was strained when it reached him. "The celestial staff is sealed. The power is contained. But Chronos isn't finished. I can feel him pulling at the edges of reality. He's trying to stop Arrow." Hunter's stomach tightened. "I'm heading to him now. Stay on your guard." In a flash, time twisted around him again, pulling him from the moment of triumph back into the chaotic vortex of shifting timelines. When the world snapped back into place, Hunter found himself in the middle of a city he barely recognized except for the destruction. Arrow stood at the center, his fists clenched, eyes darting across the crumbling skyline. The shadows of time circled him, closing in like vultures, waiting for their moment to strike. Arrow was fast, but not fast enough to dodge time itself. Before Hunter could react, Arrow lunged forward, taking out one of the shadows with a swift strike, but as his hand connected, another ripple in time flickered, and the figure disappeared only to reappear behind him. "Damn it," Arrow cursed under his breath. "They keep phasing out of existence." Hunter sprinted toward him, drawing his weapon. "They're feeding off the timeline distortion. We need to stabilize the flow." Arrow didn't slow down, his body a blur of motion as he struck at the shadows with everything he had, but it wasn't enough. Every time he landed a blow, the timeline shifted, and his efforts seemed meaningless. "They're not letting me fix it," Arrow shouted, frustration thick in his voice. "They've already altered my timeline. This isn't supposed to be rubble. I saved this place once, but now a broken bar." Hunter moved in, firing at one of the shadows before it could reach Arrow, the blast from his weapon temporarily scattering it. "We need to disrupt their hold on the timeline. Focus on the point where they altered it." "What happened in the original timeline?" Arrow gritted his teeth, dodging another attack. "There was an explosion. I stopped it, but now it never happened." "Then we recreate it," Hunter said, his mind racing. "We need to trigger the event that resets everything." Arrow's eyes widened. "You want to set off the explosion?" "It's the only way," Hunter said, already moving toward the source of the disturbance. "If we recreate the original event, it stabilizes the flow, and Chronos loses control." Arrow hesitated for only a second, then nodded. "I'll trust you on this." They raced through the debris, dodging the shadows and reaching the heart of the city, an old energy plant that had once been on the verge of meltdown. In the original timeline, Arrow had prevented the explosion. But now, they needed to let it happen. Hunter pulled out his device, quickly adjusting the settings. "We need to rig this to detonate without taking the entire city with it. Just enough to shift the timeline back." Arrow nodded, placing his hand over the control panel. "I'll manage the timing. Once this goes off, we'll be thrown back to our proper timeline. Be ready for Chronos." The shadows closed in, sensing what they were trying to do. Hunter fired off several rounds, keeping them at bay while Arrow worked. The energy in the plant began to hum, and the ground vibrated beneath them as the power levels reached critical mass. "Almost there," Arrow muttered. "Hold them off a little longer," Hunter's vision blurred as the timeline distortion intensified, but he held his ground, fighting off the shadows as the countdown reached its final seconds. Then, with a deafening roar, the plant exploded. For a moment, the world went white, and everything seemed to freeze. Time itself shuddered, rippling across the landscape as the explosion tore through the city. But instead of devastation, there was a sudden stillness. The shadows vanished, their connection to Chronos severed. The timeline snapped back into place. Arrow stood, breathing heavily, staring at the city as it restored itself, building by building. It was like watching time rewind and correct itself. "We did it," Arrow said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "The timeline is back on track." But Hunter wasn't celebrating yet. "It's not over. Chronos is still out there, and we're running out of time." Serafina's voice came through the link again. "Hunter, something's wrong. I can feel Chronos. He's at the center of everything. He's preparing for his final move. We need to stop him now." Hunter's chest tightened. He had known this was coming. They had been playing catch up with Chronos, but now the real battle was about to begin. "Let's end this," Hunter said, his voice filled with determination. They appeared in the heart of the temporal storm. Everything around them was distorted, flickering between different moments in time: past, present, and future, all colliding in a chaotic maelstrom. Chronos stood at the center, his form shifting, his face unreadable as the fabric of reality bent to his will. "You're too late," Chronos said, his voice echoing through the void. "Time is mine to command. You've spent your lives trying to control the future, but it's always been in my hands." Hunter stepped forward, his eyes locked on Chronos. "You're wrong. Time isn't something you can control. It's something we live through. You can't rewrite history without consequences." Chronos sneered, raising his hand. "I've already rewritten your history. And now, I'll erase you from it." Serafina moved beside Hunter, her magic pulsing with raw energy. "You've been tampering with forces you don't understand, Chronos." "Time will always fight back." "Enough." Chronos's power surged, the storm around them intensifying. "I am time, and I will rewrite it as I see fit." Hunter gripped his weapon tighter, feeling the weight of the moment. This was the final battle. Everything they had fought for led to this. Together, he and his team charged at Chronos, their movements synchronized, their hearts set on one goal: restoring the timeline. The battle raged in the storm, each moment a blur of action, magic, and raw power. Hunter's strikes were precise, Arrow moved with lightning speed, Serafina's magic tore through the fabric of the storm, and Xander's technology provided the critical edge they needed. But Chronos wasn't giving up easily. He lashed out with time itself, bending reality around them, pulling them into different eras, trying to break their will. "We're not letting you win," Hunter growled, his body aching but his resolve unshaken. "Not this time." In a final, desperate move, they combined their powers, channeling everything they had into one last strike. Serafina's magic anchored them in the present, Arrow's speed destabilized Chronos's control, Xander's tech disrupted the flow of time, and Hunter he delivered the final blow. Chronos faltered, his power slipping as time corrected itself. The storm began to fade, reality snapping back into place as Chronos collapsed, defeated. For a long moment, there was silence. The Avengers stood together, battered but victorious, watching as the world around them returned to normal. The timeline had been restored, and Chronos's reign was over. Hunter let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "It's over." Serafina nodded, though there was a solemn look in her eyes. "For now." But time broken bar, it's never truly finished. As they looked out at the restored world, they knew one thing for certain: the future was still unwritten, and no matter what came next, they would face it together.